Hello, welcome to my lovely video. Today I'll be walking you through a game that I created in the most recent academic quarter, titled Darkness Rising. It was created for my solo game development class on a 10-week dev cycle. In this video, I'm first going to walk you through the game menus, as well as featuring a few of the game's sounds, and after, I will be explaining the game piece by piece, playing it by ear as I go, over gameplay that I've prepared for you in the last 24 hours. I warn you in advance, however, since I built this game to be hard, not able to be completed without extensive practice as a sort of challenge game, I was not able to complete the game's single level in one attempt, and thus I have, through the process of editing and splicing, attempted to make the game footage feel like a single conglomerative experience. With that said, since the game sounds, considering the nature of splicing, would be relatively jumbled from what you would be actually hearing in the background during the gameplay, I've taken the liberty of limiting the game sound from the gameplay portion of the walkthrough experience. Nonetheless, I have inputted the game's natural background soundtrack onto this video itself through editing to hopefully give you a bit of a cohesive feeling behind the gameplay, along with my voiceover, which you're currently already hearing. Despite this, I can assure you that all the sounds in the game work properly as they have been genuinely, extensively tested. You hear a jump sound when you jump, liquid where there is liquid, and light where there is the game's win condition. Similarly, you hear the background soundtrack in an almost exact capacity that you would be hearing it in the background of this walkthrough as the gameplay footage is rolling. Notably, I have attached links to not only the game's download on itch.io, but also the sounds themselves on Google Drive, so you can verify what I'm saying for yourself at any point in time. Now, without further ado, I again thank you for joining me in this walkthrough, and let's get started. So starting with the menu, you can see that there's the title, the play and quit button, which both highlight as you go over them with all the other menus, which work very nicely. And then on the left, you have the instructions saying the darkness is rising, ascend the tower and escape it, collect the light energy at the top to win. Similarly, on the right, you have controls, WA stay to move, mouse to look around, spacebar to jump, right? So, you look at this, and I've skipped us to the death menu. You see this every time you die. There's a restart button, main menu, and quit, with some helpful tips so that you can make sure that you know what to do just in case the directions are not clear enough, which says do not touch, like the liquid because it's bad, and then, jump to make it to the top of the tower, which is pretty straightforward. Okay, now this is the screen that you'll see when you win the game. You escape the darkness, great. It has a similar thing to the death, and there's nothing special about it. So you start, and there's one more menu I need to show you. So I'm just going to start the game really quick. So you start like this, right? And if I click escape, you have a fully functioning pause menu, resume, restart, main menu, and quit. Just to test it out here, if you look in the bottom left of the screen, you'll see that all of the buttons will have manual inputs that tell you what they're doing in the console, so you can tell that they're actually doing what they're supposed to. Obviously, I can't quit because I'm recording this in an editing program, but it gets the job done. Brings you back to the main menu, restart, resume, and once I build it, which I've already built it several times, I know that it works fine. This little blurb of text is just telling you that what I told you earlier about the sound, and you can see that it's giving you examples of the sounds that I was talking about. You've got the jump, the liquid darkness, which is honestly really gross, but it's the kind of thing you're trying to run from in the game, so it's supposed to sound like that. And then last but not least, you have the light magic, which you should hear right about now. Yes. So you hear this, right? And this is the win condition. Okay. So now we could get right into the gameplay. Okay. So as I was saying, you have the instructions, the controls, the play and quit button. Ignore the terrible quality of the video. I promise it gets better after this. It's just that Okay, so without further ado, we're going to get right into the gameplay. Again, notice that I've spliced it, so you probably won't hear anything. Okay, so now we're going to go into the gameplay of the video. Ignore the terrible quality, it gets better as it goes on. It's just that I don't have the best recording equipment, I'm going to be honest with you. So the point of this is just to show you what the death screen does. Again, terrible quality, but know that I fall into the little like darkness down there. Because, you know, again, I'm terrible at the game, and it brings you to the death screen. Okay, that's all you really need to see. So just to know that the menu is working. Okay, so now we have the real gameplay, and again, not the best quality, but it'll get better as we go along, so don't worry about that. So the idea here with this game was I wanted to make a game that leaned on my expertise in design while not stressing me in things that I'm not as good at, like, you know, art or necessarily like heavy coding logic. And so I tried to make it as simple as possible. And with that said, I figured why not do something that would be interesting while also maintaining that simplicity. And so I created this tower and derived a game mechanic that would force players to go up the tower and put pressure on them while also making it a relatively fun experience, right? And so that means of making them go up the tower is the darkness, while the pressure is because of the darkness actually rising, right? And so you start at the bottom and the darkness starts rising immediately. It's set on intervals of a couple minutes per section, enough to give you there with enough time to fall and catch yourself on lower equipment. As you can see, there was just a little bit of a transition with the screen. That's actually because I died there. This is the beginning of the splicing. But I made sure that the background would still be playing, so don't worry about that. So you'll still be hearing the background the same as you would be if you were playing and I didn't die at that point. So you'll notice that the darkness is still rising. However, again, because of the nature of the way I had to do this, you won't see it after a certain point because I die and then it starts at the bottom again. And so I was just moving the ball around for the sake of the video and where it started to keep going. As I was saying though, this is a game that's meant to be very challenging. And so it's supposed to be taken as sort of a let's see how far I can get on one life and see if I could do better the next time, as opposed to saying I want to beat this on one try, you know, and then get frustrated if you don't. Which people who did actually test it for me were surprisingly more into it than I thought, which was really nice to see. Again, if you look down, you'll see that the darkness is rising. So if I were to fall right now and I had nothing to catch me, I would have died. Now, notably, I did design the map so there are certain blocks that are placed intentionally below others. Not like, for example, with this one, how if I would fall off of it, I'd die. But if you look around the bottom edge there and see that there's those blocks that are longer around the wall, if I were to miss some of the jumps, like there, if I overshot it, I'd be very likely to land on either the longer one along the wall or the one that was just below it. Now, this is not the case with all of them, as I did want to make the game hard, as I was saying, but it gives you a chance of not immediately dying should you fall. Now, every section of the map, and there are 4 sections, has a slightly different material on it. We've already moved into the next section, the red section, and that's why we jumped over a red block earlier. You may have missed it, that's okay, because we'll be coming up on the blue block within a couple minutes here. But as you can kind of hear, just to move on for sound a bit, I tried to make the soundtrack contrary to what would cause major stress in a player because I didn't want this game to feel overwhelming. And so although there are some upbeat soundtracks at times, I wanted it to be contrary to the pressure that they would be feeling with the Darkness Rising, because as you can see, it's already gone, and down below, because I've been having to move the ball up in the process of this splicing to like actually, you know, get myself to complete the walkthrough. Anyways, moving on from the sound a little bit, because I've already explained the soundtrack, and you'll be hearing it as we go. One of the issues I had while making this game was lighting, because the tower is, as you can imagine, fairly tall. I mean, we're not even halfway up the tower yet, and we're still in the second section of the floor. So, with that said, I'd had to find a way around the rendering, the maximum like renderability that could happen with the lights. And so, as a bit of a cheeky sort of way to get around it, I deleted most of the lights and then took one of each color, the red, the yellow, and the orange light, shortened the distance and set it to a real-time update mode, and then just added harsh shadows to it. And then what I did after that is made it a child of the that's an example of one of the catch falls I was talking about, by the way. But getting back on the concept, or getting back on the topic of light, I made it a child of the character object, which is this titled light orb, as you can see in the hierarchy on the right, and which it just changed, but it's okay, you could probably still see it somewhere. Yeah, it's under the tower walls too. Anyways, I put it inside the ball because it made it seem more like it was titled as the light orb, so to speak, the character, right? And so I thought it worked out really well because it eliminated the problem of the rendering capacity while also making sure the area that the light orb was in was consistently lit, and lit in a way that was effective, not just creating, an ability to see, but also creating a sort of atmosphere to the game. You understand that it's dark around and that you are the source of light. And so I just thought that was really cool and an unexpected turn in the development that I really enjoyed. Similarly, in the last week, I've updated texturing all the objects. I forgot to mention it earlier, but we passed another one of those check marks, so now we're in the third section. The blue one we passed a little while ago. But let's see here, what should I talk about next? But continuing on with the design, if you look at the walls of the tower itself, this being the outer walls, and I apologize for the quality of the video, it got a little cruddy here. So it'll get better in about a minute. But the idea with the walls is I wanted it to seem like a bit more organic of a tower. I didn't want it to be like a skyscraper, and I didn't want it to be a cave. And so similarly to games like your classic Mario 64 even, I tried to make it very simplistic with its harsh angles and large planes. And it worked out better than I thought, because then it created because it added to the overall atmosphere of the game while also maintaining a focus in the player on the blocks as opposed to the walls themselves, which I really liked. And I think that its relatively rhythmic texture, right, its repetitive pattern really helped with that. Now, some of the catch falls are harder to see, but I also added in a few like this one. There are two in the section. You can actually see the other one right now down there, where all those tall towers were that I had jumped on. Now, similarly to that one, with this one, if I were to fall, and I'm pretty sure I left one of my falls in the video, if you fall on certain parts that I put an extra added difficulty to, and I knew it was difficult, I actually made it so that it was easy to catch yourself because of the design of it, right? And so even though you do fall, it gives you another chance, or two, or three, or, 6 in my case, because I'm terrible at my own game. I don't actually show all 6 in the video, so don't worry about that. But it creates an opportunity for players to have a bit of a low stress area, and although the jumps themselves are harder, it's a bit of a break from the typical intensity of the rest of the level where, you know, you fall once and you're basically guaranteed to die. So there we go. I skipped ahead to this and now we can move on. Okay. So with, or as one can expect, the further one goes up the tower, the harder the jumps get. And as you may have already noticed by now, these jumps are becoming more and more precise. Sometimes I make them narrower than others, like this, but other times not so much, like you're about to see, and I'll make it very straightforward where to go. I wanted it to be a bit of a pattern with each section that differed from the rest, so as you go forward you do experience new types of jumps and new types of challenges as you progress. However, I didn't want it to be a huge learning curve with figuring things out, and so in that way I never created more than one path. I always kept it very straightforward with where you're supposed to go. Here we're at a new section, by the way. As you can see, we're on a purple block, so we're on the final section. But I just thought it would be really cruel to a player to add more than one way up, and so in that way I decided to leave it as the one because they already have the added pressure, or would have the added pressure. I don't, because obviously I was, for the sake of this video, trying to just push myself forward consistently by changing the start point. But players will always have that pressure in the back of their heads of the darkness rising somewhere behind them, and so I didn't want to add to that by making it unclear where the player would need to go, because that, to me, just felt like it would be too much of a difficulty curve. This is supposed to be a challenging game, but not impossible. It's supposed to be something that pushes the players to create feelings of stress, urgency, but also a bit of an exhilaration, because, I mean, if anyone's played the game of tag, running away from something is sometimes fairly entertaining. Specifically if it's an environment that is safe for you, mentality-wise. And with this game, although if you die, although if you fall once, you lose, this isn't a game that has a reward system that makes it feel as if by losing you are somehow pushed back, right? The assumption is that you will always start at the beginning and you will always have the same variables going forward. And so in that way, it shouldn't be very surprising what you encounter, as it's just a natural progression of what you've already learned. You know, you have the thin beams, you have the precision jumps, you have height jumps, you have distance jumps, and adding those three sorts of things, the thinness of the objects, the distance they are from each other, and the height at which they're displayed above one another, it naturally progresses you as you go forward, which is nice. Okay. Now, as you can see above us, we're very close to the top, and right about at this point, you would be hearing the wind condition, because we're about 50 feet from it. Similarly to the black liquid, which you hear when you're about 50 feet away, but not beyond, you would be hearing the final wind conditions magic sound as you get to the top. And if you look down, you can see the tower really is quite large. So although it took me a while to get to the top here, thinking in terms of gameplay feel, that's a lot of energy that's being inputted into the player. Alright, now that we've got to the top, I look around. Ooh, pretty skybox. You can't leave this little box of rocks here because I put barriers, but right in front of us, that's what's making the wind condition sound. And so I'm just going to walk into it, and it should bring us to a windscreen. There you go. It works. Great. And at that point, you know, maybe I think I hit the menu button or something. But the bottom line is that you start at spawn, you work through the menus, right? And by getting that magic, you have escaped. All right, so you hit the menu button, it takes us back to the nice little menu. And that's the walkthrough, essentially. There's really not much other to talk about other than my own game development process. But ultimately, I designed this game with my personal skill sets in mind, but also scope. We only had 9, 10 weeks to make this game. And considering the idea of other classes, possible fallbacks, like I get sick or there's an unexpected emergency and stuff, I purposely designed the game so that I could feasibly miss an entire week of school for whatever reason and still be able to complete the game in its entirety because I built in a week of stretch goals for myself. Should everything have gone right, right? The stretch goals consisted of adding more objects to jump on, right? Slightly spacing them, adding voiceover to add a bit of pizzazz to the game, and also adding a score system so that players can track exactly how many blocks they jumped on as they go forward, which would be easy to do through trigger boundaries and a simple numerical variable to track, as well as UI canvas to just put on the top of the screen, which is similar to all the pause menus that I used. And it would have been nice, right? However, me, myself, and I decided to get sick for a week, and then, so they didn't really happen, which is fine though, because it proved to me, which was really valuable to me, that extra week of plan, like that extra week planned in of, you know, possible fallbacks, right? If I had not planned for that and I was building the game, it would have pushed me back a week behind if I did not plan that in. And so having that, with the hindsight looking back, I'm really proud of myself for planning that in and planning my own dev process in a way to where the game itself was completed maybe 6 weeks into the quarter, and then everything after that was sound, lighting, art. It was all basically making it pretty and polishing, making sure that the coding was working nice, getting rid of some bugs if they arose. And so it was really nice to have that sort of experience for myself because it taught me a lot about not only, the development process of the game, but the preconception, the design, the planning, keeping scope in mind, which I learned a lot from a couple of my other classes. And so it was really nice to have this sort of development experience, especially when the classes ahead are capstone classes for the most part. It was very valuable to me. Anyways, this has been my walkthrough for my video game, my nice little small indie video game, Darkness Rising. I thank you for joining me, and it was a pleasure to have you.